Dear friends, good evening, and thank you for joining us to our first chamber lecture series. And as we continue with our seminar in the science of meditation, today we're going to look at the story of the Chinese master Feng. This is one more of those very enigmatic and very interesting stories, and let's walk you down through it. It so happens that the Chinese master Feng, he walked into the ranks of priesthood by the time that he was 15 years old, and he became ordained at the age of 20 back in the monastery of Xingsu. Feng knew very well that all human beings are simply miserable automatons who are walking around with their consciousness in a deep state of sleeping. And he decided that he was going to invest all of his necessary effort so that he could awaken his consciousness through the science of meditation. Notice how he started at the age of 15 and he became ordained at the age of 20. 15 and 20 are certainly not by mistake. The Kabbalistic synthesis of the number 15, 1 plus 5
equals 20.
1 plus 5 equals 6. And 6 is the arcanum of indecision. This is the arcanum in which we are invited to fully define ourselves. And then the number 20, as an arcanum as well, is the arcanum of resurrection, of being born again. So what happens with Feng? He started with his initial series of works, and he was working under the wise direction of Master Tuangxiao. And Tuangxiao taught him a huatao. A huatao is a koan. A koan is an enigmatic phrase that when the mind hears it, it cannot interpret. It's a question or a statement that when the mind receives it, it shocks the mind in such a way that the mind cannot process it. So Master Tuangxiao gave the koan to the Chinese master Feng. And his very first koan was, "Where was I before birth? And where will I be after death?" Feng started working with this koan, but he was not able to concentrate on it because every time that he would be asking the enigmatic question in that koan, "Where was I before birth?" his mind would rebel against him. All of a sudden, he would start creating opinions, contradictions, opposing concepts. And he was suffering tremendously. He had a deep longing in his heart, and he was seeking with all of his internal might to be able to become liberated from that mental dualism, from the constant comparisons, from the constant contemplation of options, and always seeking to go with anything that offers not only the path of least resistance, but that offers the least amount of suffering. And what happens? And what happens to all of us as much as it happened to the Chinese master Feng, is that for us, experiencing that which is real is completely impossible for as long as our consciousness is trapped within that constant battle of opposites of the mind. Every time that we are experiencing those contradicting opinions, that constant battle of antitheses, well, we are caught deep in the mesh of those illusory functionalisms of the mind. So Feng used to cry unconsolably. And he used to suffer tremendously, longing for the opportunity to become lost within the illuminating void. But he failed with the koan that was given to him by the master Tuang Xiao. So the tradition says that in his suffering, in his deep anguish and desperation, he found Master Sui Jing, and filled with compassion and loving kindness, Shui Yang gave Cao Feng the mantra Wu. And this master Shui Yang gave Cao Feng this mantra Wu with one condition. You need to come back and tell me on a daily basis how is it that it's going for you as you are meditating. You see, Master Shui Yang taught Cao Feng to meditate with this sacred word of power. And the mantra Wu is meant to be chanted in the mind twice. And it should sound like the howling winds of a hurricane as it is blowing through the branches and leaves of a very dense forest. This mantra is chanted silently within the realm of the mind, with the sole purpose of achieving the silence, the serenity, and the quietude that the mind needs. But remember, it must always imitate the howling of a hurricane. As we are doing this, we need to make a deliberate effort to make sure that our mind is absolutely still, that it is in profound silence outside and inside, that there should not be the slightest desire, not even the most insignificant of thoughts must come to create a distraction in the mind. So what happens? The great master Shui Yang gives Cao Feng this mantra Wu. And Shui Yang was so proficient. He was such a great teacher that all of his explanations were completely simple. They were outstandingly clear. And this resulted in Cao Feng from lowering his guard, from not investing the right degree of intensity into the work, and then he became negligent. He became lazy because he really had to put no effort at all to understand what Master Shui Yang was telling him. But lucky for him, Master Shui Yang not only was a very sweet old man, he was at times very, very severe. And one day, Cao Feng walked into the master's room, and in a very severe voice, the master Shui Yang told Cao Feng, "Who has brought this cadaver in your name?" He was not even done saying this when he stood up and he grabbed Cao Feng and he dragged it outside of the room and he kicked them out. Later on, Cao Feng, he decided that he was going to follow the example, the life example of Xingxiang, and he sought refuge in a meditation hall. All of those meditation practices, he knew very well that they slowly lead to the awakening of the consciousness, which is in reality the awakening of the Buddha. So at one time, while Cao Feng was sleeping and his body was resting, he remembered with a tremendous clarity a koan that stated, "All things reduce to unity." But what does unity reduce to? The ancient traditions say that the moment that this koan inundated his mind, he became terribly confused. He was so disoriented that he could not tell the difference between east and west. He could not tell the difference between north and south. And after 6 days of being in this very deep, confusing mental state, it so happened that as he was chanting prayers with infinite devotions within that lumisol of meditation, he raised his head, and with his faculty of clairvoyance, he was able to see those last two mysterious phrases that exist in that ancient sutra that was written by the fifth patriarch, Yang. Those phrases that read, "Oh, it is you, you whom I have always known, you who comes and goes within the 30,000 days of a century." As this happened, Feng knew that he had to bring about constancy in his exercise of meditation. So he immediately went back to continue working on that mysterious phrase that he had heard from his master Shui. "Who has brought this cadaver in your name?" That koan had been engraved with characters of fire within his own mind. And he felt, as he dwelled in this koan, as if his mind and his personality had both perished, as if his divine spirit had resuscitated after death. He was feeling very joyous on the inside. He was feeling as if a big load had been lifted out of his shoulders. And when this happened, he was only 24 years of age. He was still seeking to fully awaken his consciousness by the time that he had become 30. So one day, our good friend Feng, a master, stopped him and asked him, "Can you dominate yourself out in the daylight?" And he said, "Yes, of course I can," with a lot of conviction. The master looked at him and asked him, "Can you dominate yourself when you are dreaming?" And his reply was, "Certainly, of course I can." And then the master contemplated him and asked, "When you sleep without dreaming, where is the master?" And at this moment, Feng could not answer the question. And the moment that he realized that he was unable to process that koan, new sufferings emerged from the very depths of his soul. And at that moment, his master told him, "From this point forward, I don't want you to study Buddhism, and I don't want you to be studying Dharma. As a matter of fact, I don't want you to be studying anything. I don't want you to study anything old, as much as I don't want you to be studying anything new. I only want you to eat when you're hungry, and I want you to rest when you are tired. And when you wake up, become very mindful of your mind and ask yourself, who is the master of this awakening? And where does his body rest? And where is his life going?" Feng was a man of tremendous willpower. And he decided with tremendous conviction that he was going to understand this one way or the other, even though in the effort he would come across as a blatant idiot to anyone around them looking at him. So 5 years of very intense work went by. And one day, it doesn't matter which day, as he was working on this particular koan, right there, deep in the sleepness of his body, a fellow monk who was sleeping next to him, he unconsciously pushed the pillow, and the pillow landed on the floor. And the noise that made that pillow was enough to create a shock of consciousness for Feng that resulted in all of his doubts disappearing. He was feeling with tremendous joy that he had been able to leap away from a deep trap. All of these mysterious phrases and all of these enigmatic teachings that the masters and the Buddhas had given him, all of these problems of the past, of the present, and of the future, they all became very clear to him. And with the falling of that pillow, Cao Feng remained and became illuminated. Friends, there are two types of illumination. There is the illumination of self or auto-consciousness. And there is the illumination of objective wisdom. The first one is known as the illumination of the dead waters. And it is called the illumination of the dead waters because that is the illumination that carries with itself attachments. We are still bound at the moment that we are experiencing this illumination of dead waters. There are many great masters of meditation who are completely capable of achieving samadhi every time they sit down and meditate. They can bring down a stillness of the mind, a stillness of the physicality and of the emotional center that is so deep and so profound that the consciousness will escape the bottle of the ego and will immediately go and dwell within the realm of the illuminating void. These are great masters of meditation that have the capacity of experiencing life within the Christ planets. The problem is that they may be there and visit the void, but they cannot remain there. They always have to come back. They always have to return into their physicality so that they can continue working and doing the work of the elimination of the ego. For as long as there is ego, the consciousness would not emancipate. For as long as there is ego, there will be fears and judgments. There will be difficulties and there will be illness. And we will certainly remain bound. But the next type of consciousness beyond this one of the dead waters is what is known as the illumination that comes with the great life. This objective consciousness is boundless, and it is called the state of noose. This is what happens when we become able to incarnate our innermost. This is what happens when we are able not only to create the superior existential bodies of the being, but when we can experience the nativity of the Christ within our own heart. When there are no attachments, we can become part of this constant stream and flow of life. So there is a difference. And in our work, our focus has to be on calming ourselves, on calming the mind, calming the emotions, on learning how to achieve an internal state of stillness so that we can give an opportunity to that consciousness to emancipate, so that we can allow that consciousness to experience that illuminating void and return charged into the physicality, so that it can give us even greater strength and more conviction in the work. Because we need the level of willpower that Feng practiced in his life. For him to be able to experience that illumination with the subtle shock that comes from a pillow landing on the floor is certainly a wonderfully beautiful experience. Friends, my insignificant person, the people around us, your own person, things, creatures that exist of all kinds, they do not exist. They are only illusory mental formations that must be reduced to cosmic dust. The only true thing is Brahma. The only thing that is real is the infinite spiritual space in which the eternal feminine is contained and the sacred monad resides. Everything outside of that is part of this realm of things that pass, of things that are temporal. So we have to choose where is it that we are seeking to become lost. There are millions of human beings who become lost in the spheres of hell. But Samael says, we the Gnostics, we prefer to become lost in Brahma. It is urgent that we make an effort so that our mental content, that thing which is known as chitta, that we keep it and prevent it from acquiring diverse forms. It is through the interior meditation, through that deep and profound effort of calmness and serenity, where we can bring about the cessation, the stopping of all of these mental waves, and where we can calm down our intellectual lake. Whenever that stops, the experience of that which is real, it happens naturally. Samael tells us that when the infinite spiritual space that is known as Brahma assumes any kind of form to be able to communicate with its avatars, with its messengers, it becomes Ishvara. Ishvara is the master of all the masters. Ishvara is a Purusha. Ishvara has no mind. Ishvara is void of suffering. It is void of all actions. It is void of all results. And it is void of all desires. So we're going to leave you today with a practice. The first thing that we will ask you is that you assume a posture that is comfortable for you. And you know that you can do this by sitting down and allowing your feet to be flat on the floor, your spine vertical, and your head just resting comfortably at the top of your spine. But you can also lay on your back on a corpse posture with your head pointing towards the east or pointing towards the north. Or you can assume the posture of the five-pointed star. Whatever your posture is, make sure that you calm your physicality and that you relax it, that you calm your emotions, and that you bring about the calmness of the mind. And as you're doing this, observe your thoughts. We are not seeking for an experience. We are not seeking to see lights or experience heat. We're not seeking to see masters or angels hovering around us, to hear voices. We're not seeking any of that. Those are artifices of our own fanaticism. We will limit ourselves to be entirely contemplative. So we will observe our thoughts. Observe what is your psychological state. Are you euphoric? Do you feel happy? Are you content? Are you in a state of boredom or indifference? Are you sad? Are you angry? Are you feeling victim? Are you in propitiation? Whatever it is, observe what is your psychological state. And as you understand that, observe what keeps you worried. What keeps you distracted? What is bringing about preoccupations into your day? And as you can see that, because all of our worries are made of not worry things, because all of our preoccupations are made of not preoccupation things, we can then start looking at what are those not worry things. What are those impressions that have not been adequately transformed? Impressions that may have happened today, or yesterday, or maybe the week before. And as you gain that degree of comprehension, allow yourself to discard your thoughts. Empower your consciousness to be contemplative, to comprehend, and to see how those thoughts crumble and how they naturally fall into a deep abyss. When you're doing this, then bring about the mantra Wu. And allow this mantra to vibrate deep in within your mind. Seek serenity, and everything else will happen naturally. Dear friends, we have been able to source this material from Samael's Christmas message of the year 1967 to the year 1968. And as always, we are very grateful to all the sources out of which we gathered these images to be able to put this material ready for you. So dear friends, this has been our lecture on the Chinese master, Feng. Thank you very much for joining us this evening, and may all beings be happy.